Welcome, dear listener, to a quiet little book that asks a very big question, where in the middle of all this noise, all this striving, all this endless human struggle, does real peace actually live? The author of this work is James Allen, a name many of you will already know from his most famous book, As a Man Thinks, a slim little volume that has quietly shaped the inner lives of millions of readers since it was first written. Allen was not a man of great worldly ambition. He gave up a comfortable business career, moved to a small English village, and spent the rest of his days writing, gardening, and thinking deeply about the inner life. He believed with complete and unshakable conviction that the thoughts we hold in secret eventually become the life we live in the open. This particular book, called A Way of Peace, is one of Allen's quieter, more contemplative works, written not to teach you how to get rich or how to succeed in business, but simply how to find rest, real rest, the kind that does not depend on circumstances going your way. Allen takes us, step by step, through meditation, through the struggle between self and truth, through the slow acquiring of spiritual strength, through selfless love, through what he calls entering into the infinite, through the quiet example of the saints and sages who came before us, and finally, into the realization of a peace that nothing in this world can disturb. So take a slow breath, let your shoulders drop, and let's walk this gentle path together. Allen begins by telling us that spiritual meditation is the true pathway to the divine. He calls it a mystic ladder, reaching from earth all the way up to heaven, from error up to truth, from pain up to peace. Every saint who ever lived has climbed this ladder, he tells us, and every tired traveler who finally turns away from the world and toward their true home must, sooner or later, place their feet upon its golden steps. Without this practice, Allen insists, you simply cannot grow into the divine likeness, and the deep and lasting joys of truth will remain hidden from you. But what exactly is meditation in Allen's sense of the word? It is the intense, sustained dwelling of thought upon a single idea with the honest purpose of truly understanding it. And here's a remarkable part. Whatever you meditate upon most constantly, you do not simply come to understand, you actually begin to grow into its likeness. It becomes woven into the very fabric of your being. If you constantly dwell on what is selfish and low, you will slowly become selfish and low. If you constantly dwell on what is pure and unselfish, you will just as surely become pure and unselfish. Allen offers us a simple but piercing test here. Tell him what it is that you most frequently and most intensely think about, what your soul naturally turns to in its quiet hours, and he will tell you with real confidence what kind of destination you're traveling toward, whether you are growing into something noble or something base. There is, he says, an almost unavoidable tendency to become the very embodiment of whatever quality occupies our thoughts most constantly. So let the object of your meditation always point upward, never downward, so that every time your mind returns to it, you're lifted a little higher rather than dragged a little lower. This kind of meditation, Allen tells us, is the true secret behind all growth in spiritual understanding. Every great teacher, every sage, every founder of a great faith became what they were through this very practice. The Buddha meditated on truth so deeply and so long that he could finally say, I am the truth itself. Jesus brooded on the nearness of the divine until he could declare, my Father and I are one. And here Allen makes a distinction that is worth sitting with for a moment. Meditation of this kind is the very soul of prayer. Mere petition, asking for things without this deeper reflection, is like a body without a soul. It has no real power to lift us above our troubles. If you find yourself praying daily for wisdom, for peace, for a fuller sense of truth, and yet these things remain stubbornly distant from you, it may simply mean that you are praying for one thing while living, in your daily thought and action, quite another. Stop clinging selfishly to whatever it is that keeps you from the very things you claim to want, Alan suggests, and instead begin to actually think and act in the spirit of the truth you are asking for. Little by little, you will find yourself growing into the very reality you once only prayed toward. Nobody expects to gain any worldly advantage without real effort, Alan reminds us. So why would we expect spiritual treasures to simply arrive unearned? Only when we begin working earnestly within this inner kingdom do we become ready to receive its nourishment. He is careful here to distinguish real meditation from idle daydreaming. There is nothing dreamy or impractical about it all. It is, in his words, a process of searching, uncompromising thought that allows nothing to remain standing except the plain, naked truth. In this kind of thinking, you stop trying to defend your own prejudices and instead simply and honestly seek what is true, removing, piece by piece, the errors you have quietly built up around yourself over the years. Alan recommends setting aside a particular time each day for this practice, and he favors the very early morning, when the whole world still carries a spirit of rest. The passions, calmed by the long quiet of the night, are subdued. The worries of yesterday have not yet crowded back in. The mind, both strong and restful at once, becomes unusually receptive to spiritual instruction. To be spiritually awake, he insists, is also to be mentally and physically awake. Every great spiritual teacher throughout history, he notes, rose early. Jesus climbed solitary mountains before dawn for quiet communion. The Buddha rose a full hour before sunrise every single day of his life and asked the same discipline of every one of his followers. But Alan is compassionate here too. If your daily labor begins at some very early hour and truly forecloses this practice in the morning, he suggests giving an hour to it at night instead. And if even that proves impossible because of how demanding your work is, he reminds us that we can still turn our thoughts upward during small, otherwise wasted moments throughout the day. Even, he notes, while performing work that has become so practiced, it runs almost automatically. The great Christian mystic Jacob Boehme, he points out, arrived at a profound spiritual insight while working long hours as an ordinary shoemaker. There is time to think in every life, no matter how busy or laborious. Spiritual meditation, Alan tells us, cannot be separated from honest self-examination. You begin to question your own motives, your own thoughts, your own actions, comparing them calmly and fairly against your ideal. If you struggle with anger or resentment, meditate deliberately on gentleness and forgiveness until you become acutely aware of just how harsh your old habits truly were. As you dwell on love, gentleness, and forgiveness instead, an understanding of the great law of love will quietly steal into your heart, along with real insight into how that law touches every corner of daily conduct. He shares here the Buddha's own teaching on what are called the 5 great meditations. Love, in which you genuinely wish for the well-being of every creature, even those who have wronged you. Pity, in which you vividly imagine the sorrows and anxieties of others until real compassion stirs within you. Joy, in which you rejoice without envy in the good fortune of others. A sober reflection on the true cost of impurity and wrongdoing, and how fleeting its pleasures really are set against its consequences. And finally, serenity, in which you rise above both love and hatred, wealth and want, and regard your own fate with calm, unshaken tranquility. Whether or not you follow these exact 5 meditations, Alan says, matters far less than the sincerity of your hunger for truth. Let your heart, through this practice, grow wider and wider until it embraces the whole world with tenderness, the way a flower slowly opens its petals to receive the morning light. Now, from this foundation of meditation, Alan turns to describe a battle that he believes is waged quietly and constantly within every human heart, a struggle between what he calls the 2 masters, self and truth. Upon this inner battlefield, Alan tells us, 2 rulers are forever contending for the crown of the heart. The master of self, whom he also calls the prince of this world, fights with the weapons of passion, pride, vanity, and stubborn self-will. The master of truth, gentle and humble, fights instead with gentleness, patience, purity, humility, and love. No soul can serve both masters at once, Alan insists, echoing the words of Jesus himself, who said that no man can serve 2 masters, for you'll either despise the one or cling to the other. Truth, Alan writes, is astonishingly simple. So simple, in fact, that it admits no real complexity, no clever qualification. Self, by contrast, is endlessly crooked and inventive, always finding new turns and excuses. Those who worship self convince themselves they can gratify every desire while still somehow possessing the truth. But those who genuinely love truth sacrifice self in order to hold it and guard themselves carefully against worldliness and self-seeking. If you truly wish to know truth, Alan says plainly, you must be willing to renounce all the way down, because truth in its full glory can only be seen once the very last trace of self has disappeared. Are you willing to give up your own private lusts, your prejudices, your fixed opinions? If so, you may enter the narrow way and discover a peace the wider world simply cannot touch. There is one particular quality, Alan notes, that most clearly separates the person governed by truth from the person governed by self. And that quality is humility, not merely being free from vanity and stubbornness, but genuinely regarding one's own opinions as being of very little importance. The person still enslaved by self mistakes his own opinions for truth itself, and everyone else's opinions for error. But the humble lover of truth learns to see all people with real charity, and willingly sets aside his own opinions in order to love more fully. Alan offers us a very simple, searching test here for examining our own hearts. Do you harbor suspicion, envy, or pride? Or do you actively resist these feelings when they arise? Are you self-willed and self-indulgent, or gentle, mild, and genuinely ready to give up your own preferences for the sake of another? Do you still crave riches, status, or power, or have you set down that particular burden? However you answer honestly, Alan says, tells you plainly which master currently holds the crown of your own heart. He borrows a beautiful passage here from the ancient Bhagavad Gita, describing the qualities of the truly awakened soul: fearlessness, an open and generous hand, a mind slow to anger, a heart untroubled by desire, deep tenderness toward every suffering creature, and an unshakable equanimity that never rushes to judge another's faults. The giving up of self that Alan calls for is not, he is careful to clarify, merely giving up outward possessions. It is a renunciation of inward sin, inward error, not the giving away of riches, but the giving up of the desire for riches, not merely speaking gentle words, but genuinely relinquishing hatred and self-seeking from the heart. You could withdraw entirely from society, retreat to the depths of some quiet forest, Alan notes wryly, and still carry every ounce of your own selfishness along with you, unless you first renounce it within. The truest renunciation, he insists, is to remain fully engaged with your ordinary duties in the world, while quietly renouncing the inward enemy of self. As we let go of self, Alan tells us, we begin, almost without noticing, to see things in their proper proportion for the very first time. Whoever is swayed by passion or prejudice sees only his own private illusions reflected everywhere. But whoever has become genuinely free of bias sees himself clearly, sees others clearly, and finds a real and settled peace, because he has nothing left to defend, nothing left to conceal. All suffering, Alan concludes here, ultimately traces back to self. If you feel bitter disappointment because your plans were thwarted, if you feel stinging regret over your own conduct, if you feel wounded by what someone said about you, in every case, you're still walking the narrow, painful road of self. Only in truth is all of this sorrow finally set down. Let's turn now from this inward battle to what Alan calls the acquirement of spiritual power. The world, Alan observes, is filled with people chasing pleasure, novelty, and excitement, but very few are actually seeking real strength or stability. Men and women of genuine power and influence remain rare, simply because so few are willing to make the sacrifices that real character requires. To be tossed about by your own fluctuating moods and impulses is weakness. To calmly direct those same forces with steady purpose is true power. The real difference between a powerless person and a powerful one, Alan tells us, is not stubbornness of will, since the merely stubborn man is often quite foolish, but rather a settled, calm knowledge of underlying principle. A person begins to develop genuine power the moment he checks his impulses, falls back on the calmer, higher consciousness within himself, and steadies his whole life upon some unshakable principle. When, after much searching and even suffering, the light of some eternal principle finally dawns on a soul, a deep calm follows, along with a joy that words cannot fully capture. The man who is governed only by self, Alan warns, will change his position the moment his own comfort feels threatened, because he is, at bottom, only ever defending his own private interests. Work built on such shifting ground eventually crumbles away entirely. But the man who stands upon a genuine principle remains the very same calm, steady person under every circumstance, even when facing the loss of everything he owns, even, Alan notes soberly, when facing torture or death itself. It is precisely in the hour of crisis, Alan tells us, that we discover who genuinely stands for peace, brotherhood, and love, and who is merely paying those ideals lip service while comfortable. Anyone can claim to believe in universal love, while their own comforts remain untouched. The true test comes only when those comforts are threatened. There is no shortcut here, Alan insists. The only path to real spiritual power is through inward illumination, gained by patiently meditating on principles like divine love, purity, and compassion, and then bringing their searching light to bear honestly on your own habits, your speech, your private thoughts. As you persevere in this practice, your own shortcomings will stand out more and more clearly, spurring you toward renewed effort, until at last that inward harmony itself becomes your very source of strength. Growth in self-control, in patience, in calm equanimity, Alan says, is growth in real strength. And just as a child learns to walk only through many attempts and many small falls, so too must we learn to stand on our own inner conviction, breaking free from the pressure of custom and the opinions of others, relying instead on our own honestly examined conscience. You will stumble many times along this path, Alan admits candidly, but press on nonetheless, trusting that sure victory waits somewhere ahead. For selfishness, in any of its many forms, is simply dissipation and weakness. Unselfishness, rightly understood, is conservation, strength, and life itself. Now, having spoken of power, Alan turns his attention to something gentler, and in his eyes, even greater, the realization of selfless love. Just as the sculptor Michelangelo said he could see a finished figure of beauty hidden within every rough, unshaped block of stone, waiting only for the patient chisel to reveal it, so too, Alan tells U.S., does a divine image lie hidden within every human heart, waiting for the patient work of faith to bring it fully into view. And this divine image, once revealed, is nothing other than stainless, selfless love. Reaching this love, Alan is honest to say, requires real and sustained effort upon the heart and mind. Whoever sets out to reach it will be tested thoroughly. And this testing is entirely necessary, because how else could a soul acquire the sublime patience without which no real wisdom is possible? There will be moments when all your effort seems to have accomplished nothing at all, when careless conduct mars the very image you have been so carefully shaping. But whoever has truly set their heart on this highest goal recognizes no such thing as final defeat. Every stumble, every small failure becomes simply one more lesson learned, one more grain of wisdom extracted, helping the seeker along toward the very thing they are striving for. Divine love, Alan is careful to point out, differs from our ordinary human loves in one supremely important way. It holds no partiality whatsoever. Human love clings tightly to a single particular object, and when that object is taken away, deep suffering inevitably follows. Divine love, by contrast, embraces the entire universe at once, without clinging to any single part of it, and so it does not suffer in the same way. And yet, Alan adds gently, our ordinary human loves are not to be dismissed. They are necessary and important steps on the road toward this larger love. No soul becomes ready for divine love until it has first learned to feel deeply and fully through these smaller, more personal human loves. It is only by passing through these human loves, and through their accompanying human sorrows, that we finally reach and recognize the greater love beyond them. It is right and fitting. Alan suggests that a mother grieves deeply when she loses a child, that friends and lovers suffer real anguish when parted from one another, that the proud and the self-seeking sometimes meet with humbling defeat, not because suffering is good in itself, but because these very experiences are often what finally turn the human heart away from clinging to fleeting things and toward the deeper, unshakable reality that alone can hold it. How, then, does one actually reach this realization? Alan's answer is disarmingly simple. Empty yourself, and that love will fill the space you have made. Divine love cannot be truly known until self has been set aside, because self is, in its very nature, the denial of that love. Only once the stone of self has been rolled away from the heart does this deeper love, previously hidden and unrecognized, rise fully into view, much like a resurrection. He asks us a pointed, personal question here. You may believe that Christ rose from the dead 2,000 years ago, Alan says, and he does not dispute that belief. But do you also believe that the same gentle spirit of love is, in a very real sense, put to death daily upon the cross of your own selfish desires? Have you truly been saved from your temper, your vanity, your habit of harshly judging others? If not, Alan asks gently, then from what exactly have you been saved? Whoever has genuinely realized this selfless love becomes, in Alan's words, a new person entirely, no longer dominated by the old habits of self, and known instead for patience, purity, self-control, and an unfailing sweetness of spirit. This love, he insists, is not merely a passing sentiment or emotion. It is a settled state of knowledge that dissolves the old belief in evil altogether and lifts the whole soul into a joyful recognition of the deep goodness underlying everything. The whole world, Alan believes, is quietly moving toward this very realization, though it does not yet fully understand what it is truly reaching for. Every human grasping after happiness, however clumsy or misdirected, is really an attempt, however unconscious, to reach the same selfless love. Suffering will continue, he says plainly, only until humanity, taught at last by its own self-inflicted pain, finally discovers a love that asks nothing in return. Now, before we move further into the final chapters of this book, let's pause here for a moment. If this slow, patient walk through James Allen's thinking is giving you something worth carrying into your own day, something to sit with quietly, the way Allen himself asks us to sit with these ideas, consider subscribing to the channel. It's a simple way to make sure these kinds of reflections keep finding their way to you. Now, let's continue on into the chapter Allen calls Entering into the Infinite. From the very beginning of human history, Allen writes, men and women have sensed, somewhere beneath all their clinging to worldly pleasures, the limited and passing nature of material existence, and in their quieter moments have reached instinctively toward some fuller and more lasting reality. Pain and sorrow, again and again, remind us just how unsatisfying purely material things really are, and this quiet, persistent unrest within us is itself proof that we are, at our core, something more than merely mortal. Just as the smallest drop of water, taken from the ocean, still carries within it every quality of that vast ocean, so too, Allen tells us, does each human being carry within him the likeness of the infinite, even while feeling, for a time, separate from it. And just as that single drop must, by its very nature, eventually find its way back to the sea, so too must every human soul eventually return to its source, dissolving its sense of separateness into the greater whole, to become one again with the infinite, Allen says, is the ultimate goal of human life. But this state can never be fully grasped by the merely personal self, because personality, separateness, and selfishness are, at bottom, all the very same thing and stand directly opposed to wisdom. Only by surrendering the personal self entirely, Allen insists, does a person come into possession of this larger, more lasting inheritance. He offers a memorable image here. Every single form in nature is impermanent and constantly changing. Only the underlying principle behind all of nature truly endures. By quietly overcoming our own selfish inclinations, which is really a way of rising above the pull of our lower nature, a person begins to emerge, as if from a chrysalis, into the wider, more enduring light of universal truth from which all these passing forms originally arose. Only goodwill, Allen writes, quoting an old teaching, truly gives insight, and only the person who has so thoroughly overcome their own personal bias that goodwill becomes their single, steady attitude toward every living creature possesses real spiritual insight, the kind capable of telling truth from illusion. Wherever you find unbroken gentleness, enduring patience, deep humility, and abundant compassion, Allen tells us, look there for real wisdom, because that person has, in every meaningful sense, become one with the infinite. There is one great law, Allen writes, demanding complete obedience, one unifying principle underlying all the world's apparent diversity. To truly grasp this law is to enter fully into the infinite, to become one with eternal itself. And to center one's whole life upon this great law of love is to find rest, harmony, and lasting peace. Only by yielding up the personal self, Alan tells us, are life's hardest problems truly overcome, because problems at their root exist only within our own self-created illusions, and simply dissolve oneself has been honestly set aside. Now let's turn to the chapter Alan calls Saints, Sages, and Saviors, in which he considers what he calls the law of service, the spirit of love expressed through a full and rounded life. Alan writes, is the very crown of human existence, the highest purpose any earthly knowledge can serve. The true measure of a person's grasp on truth, he insists, is the measure of their love, and truth remains distant from anyone whose life is not actually governed by love. Those who are intolerant or quick to judge others, no matter how loudly they profess the highest religious beliefs, hold, in Alan's view, only the smallest possible measure of truth. Those who instead exercise real patience, listening calmly and fairly to every side of question, hold truth in its fullest measure. Truth, Alan says plainly, can never simply be argued into existence through clever words or learned essays. It can only ever be lived, manifested as a genuinely stainless heart and a truly consistent life. If people cannot perceive truth through patient forgiveness and wide-reaching compassion, no amount of clever argument will ever convince them otherwise. There exists, Alan tells us, one great, all-embracing law forming the very foundation of the universe, the law of love. This law has been called by countless different names across countless different cultures and eras, but underneath all these different names, the very same unchanging law can always be found by anyone who looks honestly for it. Names, religions, and individual personalities all eventually pass away, Alan reminds us, but this law of love itself remains. This law, being entirely impersonal in its nature, finds its highest and fullest expression in what Alan calls service. Once the purified heart has genuinely realized truth, it is called upon to make one final and greatest sacrifice, giving up the private, personal enjoyment of that very truth, choosing instead to dwell humbly among ordinary people, content to be considered, in Alan's words, the servant of all mankind. This particular kind of profound humility, he says, is the true seal of genuine spiritual attainment. Alan points here to the striking similarity found across all the world's great spiritual teachers. Compare their lives and their teachings honestly, he suggests, and you'll find in every case the very same simplicity, the very same self-sacrifice, humility, love, and peace, both lived out and taught. They stand, in his phrase, between ordinary personal humanity and the impersonal divine, serving as living examples for the salvation of a self-absorbed world. Sadly, Alan notes, people who remain caught up in their own particular sense of self often deny genuine divinity to every spiritual teacher except their own, introducing personal hatred and endless doctrinal argument in the process, thereby draining the unselfish beauty right out of the very teachings they claim to defend so passionately. Truth, Alan insists firmly, can never be limited to any single group, school, or nation. The moment personal pride enters the picture, genuine truth is lost. True service, in Alan's understanding, means forgetting oneself entirely in love toward others, losing oneself gladly in work done purely for the good of the whole. Whoever performs their duties, however humble those duties may seem, without any thought of personal gain, and with genuine joy in the sacrifice itself, has found real and lasting service. Work performed instead from love of self, however brilliant or outwardly successful it may appear, is, in Alan's view, ultimately hollow, and it does not endure. Now, finally, let's move into Alan's closing reflection, the realization of what he calls perfect peace. Out in the wider world, Alan observes, there is ceaseless turmoil, endless change, restless unease. But at the very heart of all things, underneath all that surface commotion, there lies a deep and undisturbed repose, and in that quiet depth the eternal itself resides. Every human being, Alan tells us, carries both of these realities within them at once, both the surface unrest and the deeper, unshakable calm. Just as the calmest depth of the ocean remain untouched by even the fiercest storm raging on its surface, so too, Alan writes, there exists silent, holy depths within every human heart that the storms of sin and sorrow can never truly disturb. To find this inner silence and to learn to live consciously within it is what Alan means by peace. This inward peace, this silence and quiet harmony, is what Alan calls the kingdom of heaven, difficult to reach only because so few people are genuinely willing to set self aside and become, in the old phrase, like little children. People often cry out for peace, Alan notes wryly. In the very midst of discord and restless striving they themselves continue to create. Apart from a wisdom rooted in real self-renunciation, there simply can be no lasting, genuine peace. The peace that comes from social comfort or worldly victory, Alan warns, is only ever temporary, and it burns away quickly under the heat of real trial. Only the deeper peace he describes endures through every difficulty, and only a genuinely selfless heart can come to know it fully. Self-control leads toward it, he tells us, and the ever-growing light of wisdom guides a traveler steadily along the way. If you would truly know a light that never fades, Alan writes directly to his reader, in a stillness that cannot be shaken, then there is only one path forward, and that is to conquer yourself. Bring every thought, every impulse, every private desire into willing harmony with the deeper power already resting quietly within you. There is, he insists, simply no other road to peace. He invites us, in his closing words, to step away for a while from the noise of the outer world, from the pull of the senses, from the arguments of the intellect, and to withdraw quietly into the innermost chamber of our own heart. There, he promises, free from the intrusion of selfish desire, we will find a deep silence, a holy calm, a blissful and restful repose. And if we allow ourselves to rest there, even briefly, the clear and honest eye of truth will slowly open within us, and we will begin at last to see things exactly as they really are. And so, dear listener, we come to the end of James Allen's quiet and searching little book, The Way of Peace. We have walked together through meditation, through the ancient contest between self and truth, through the patient acquiring of real spiritual strength, through the wide and unconditional reach of selfless love, through that vast and humbling sense of entering into the infinite, through the humble example set by every saint and sage who ever truly served rather than sought to be served, and finally, into that deep and unshakable stillness Alan simply calls perfect peace. If there's one single thread running through everything Alan has shared with us today, it is this: peace was never something waiting for us somewhere out in the world, to be won through better circumstances or greater achievement. It has been quietly present all along, underneath the noise, underneath the striving, underneath even our own restless thoughts, waiting patiently for us to simply stop clinging and turn quietly inward to receive it. Thank you so much for spending this gentle hour with me and with James Allen. If these reflections gave you even a small measure of that same quiet he wrote about so carefully, please consider subscribing to the channel so these kind of journeys keep finding their way to you. Until next time, take good care of your own inward peace, and I will see you in the next one.